This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. 94% of CIOs and CISOs agree that attracting and retaining talent is increasingly critical. You can stay current on your IT skills at ACI. For individuals, use the code TWIT30 for 30% off a standard or premium individual IT Pro membership at go.acilearning.com/twit.
I should mention, in case any of our listeners might be impacted by this news, that SanDisk, my own preferred manufacturer of solid-state mass storage, and Leo, I think yours
anymore.
as well.
Not anymore. Not anymore.
I know. And SanDisk and Western Digital are both currently in the doghouse over what is alleged to be their willing and knowing sale of defective SSD products, and not just a little bit defective. The allegations are disturbing. Here's the start of what Ars Technica had to say about this. Ars wrote, amid ongoing pressure to address claims that its SanDisk Extreme SSDs are still erasing data and becoming unmountable despite a firmware fix, Western Digital is facing a lawsuit over its storage drives. A lawsuit filed last Wednesday accuses the company of knowingly selling defective SSDs. Western Digital branded SanDisk X series of Extreme V2 and Extreme Pro V2 portable SSDs, and they're often being recommended, or were, by tech review sites. Ars wrote, if you've considered a portable drive, it's likely you've come across the popular series in your search. And, of course, I'm wanting to let our listeners know because, they are popular and they may not have heard about this yet. So Ars wrote, numerous owners of the drives, including Ars Technica's own Lee Hutchinson, encountered a problem where the drives seemingly erased data and became unreadable. Lee saw two drives fill approximately halfway before showing read and write errors. Disconnecting and reconnecting showed the drive was unformatted and empty. Wiping and formatting did not resolve things.
Oh, really?
Oh,
You mean your data
wow.
didn't magically come back when you wiped and formatted? Huh?
Yeah. Complaints about the drives littered SanDisk's forums and Reddit, and Ars then provided 4 example links of typical postings for at least 4 months before Western Digital released a firmware fix in late May. The page for the update claims products currently shipping are not affected, but the company never noted customers' lost data claims. It did, however, name the affected drives. So we have the SanDisk Extreme Portable 4 terabyte, the Extreme Pro Portable 4 terabyte, same thing in 2 terabyte and 1 terabyte. That is the SanDisk Extreme Pro Portable. And also the Western Digital My Passport 4 terabyte. And then they finish, subsequent reports from The Verge, which received a replacement SSD, and some Reddit users, though, claimed the drives were still broken. Western Digital didn't answer requests for comment about newfound grievances. Okay, so for what it's worth, I just wanted to inform our listeners that this has been and apparently still is a problem. And if I were storing important data on any of those named drives, I'd be a little nervous. I wouldn't maybe store any more data on them. Now, hearing that, and I actually have sort of maybe an explanation of why. Hearing that the drive started having trouble when they became around half full was interesting to me. As an engineer, I have been astounded and shaking my head when I learned the lengths to which today's SSDs are going to achieve the storage densities they offer. For example, get a load of this. Remember first that NAND-style SSD storage cells, which is what we are using, the storage cell is really just a capacitor. It's an itty-bitty, and yes, that's an engineering term, It's an itty-bitty speck of metal sitting on top of an insulating coating. The act of writing to that cell involves cranking up the voltage internally to deliberately break down that layer of insulation to inject and strand electrons on that itty-bitty island of metal. Once there, their presence can be sensed thanks to the magic of field effect transistors. But the point is, the number of electrons which have been stranded on that electrostatic island is an inherently analog quantity. Now, the designers of the earliest flash memory, which regarded the fact that all of this worked at all to be a miracle, were quite content to only either fully fill or fully empty the islands in order to store zeros and ones there. But then management came along and demanded more density. The engineers explained that they had already made the electrostatic islands as itty-bitty as possible. But then one of them made the mistake of suggesting during a brainstorming meeting that they might be able to store 2 bits of data on each island by storing varying amounts of electrons, thus doubling the effective storage density of the same number of itty-bitty memory cells. Instead of storing a boring old 0 or 1, it would be possible to store a 0, a 1/3, a 2/3, or a 1. Since this gives us 4 separate storage levels, that's 2 bits of data. Whereas the original NAND memory cells were known as SLC for single level cell, this next generation were MLC for multi-level cell. And of course, once you've opened Pandora's box of storing what are essentially analog levels of electrostatic charge in cells, why stop at 2 bits? How about 3 or 4? Okay, so with this bit of background, here's what I learned that made me shake my head. The SSD manufacturers are aware that storing fewer bits per cell is better. It's faster to read and write, and it's more reliable. So believe it or not, today's most advanced SSDs start out by storing fewer bits per cell because it's faster and more reliable. It makes their product benchmark faster when it's mostly empty. But as their users continue to fill them up with data, the SSD begins to run out of storage at that lower, faster, and safer density. At some point of fullness, it needs to switch over to storing more bits per cell in order to actually deliver its promised and rated full storage capacity. To do that, it starts reading and rewriting existing data, which was stored at the lower bit density, into higher bit density. Essentially, it's on-the-fly cramming more bits into fewer cells because, as it turns out, its owner actually wants to use the storage capacity that they purchased. The extra complexity that had to be built into the controller to track and accomplish all of this is somewhat mind-boggling, but is obviously worth it to its product's developers. The flakiness inherent in how far SSD storage density has been pushed is one of the reasons I became certain that a continuing investment in SpinRite would be warranted into the future. Okay, now only SanDisk's engineers know why, when their drives are storing about half of their rated capacity, they suddenly developed a problem that crashed the entire drive. It could be that the drive had actually filled itself with data stored at half density and now needed to get serious about doubling up on density, and that some flaw in the drive's firmware was then triggered. We'll likely never know. This brings to mind something else that happened and was discovered last week by one of SpinRite's testers on one of their thumb drives, but I've already taken up a lot of time on this, so I'm going to share that interesting story about something else that happened and was really interesting next week. Okay.
Wow. By the way, just to correct the record, I just looked through my Amazon orders. I've never bought a SanDisk SSD. I always do the Samsung EVOs.
Oh, you're right. Samsung is also what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's not.
We like the Samsungs.
Yeah.
I don't have any.
Yeah.
SanDisk, I buy their SD cards, their solid state memory cards.
Yes, and I have a bunch of SanDisk thumb drives because I like those.
Yes, and I do too.
You're right. It's the Samsung NVMe, beautiful memories.
Yeah, or even like the 2.5-inch.
Or even the
SSDs.
big SSDs.
Yeah.
Yes, good. I'm glad you corrected that.
Samsung is not SanDisk. Thank goodness.
Right.